Okay, well, welcome everybody. I know the theme of this workshop is transforming your firm. And so I wanted to talk to you briefly about the transformation economy. And just coincidentally enough, I just literally listened to a podcast with the guest was Joseph Pine. And Joseph Pine, back in 1997, wrote a book with James Gilmore called The Experience Economy. Now, this book had an enormous impact. It basically brought Dan Morris and I together, and we started teaching some of the concepts from this book. And that's when we started really working together. And even though this book is 22 years old, I'm here to tell you that it is just as relevant today. And I want to share with you why Dan and I were so excited when we first saw this. Now, they have come out with a new book. It's not quite out yet. It's due out in on December 10th, I believe, called The Experience Economy. It's basically the third edition, but they've added a lot of stuff, and none of it contradicts what I'm about to share with you and what made us so excited. So let's dive right into the transformation economy. And this is a copy of the first edition of the book. And the subtitle is Why is Work is Theater and Every Business a Stage? And one of the themes of the book is we are what we charge for. A business is defined by that which it charges for. That's our value proposition. That's the value that we're creating and providing to the marketplace and communicating. And in this book, they laid out a hierarchy of value. And they kind of went back and looked at economic eras. So you can think of the hunter-gatherer era, and then you can think of the agricultural era. And let's start there. They basically said, if you charge for stuff, you're in the commodity business. You're maybe pulling something out of the ground, flour, oil, whatever. It's fungible. Very hard to tell one from another, one haystack from another. So you're in the commodity business. And the interesting question that Pine and Gilmore ask at each one of these levels I'm going to show you is, how do we decommoditize a commodity? In other words, if we're in the commodity business, how do we decommoditize it? And that's when they got to the next level. They said, well, look, if you charge for tangible things, you're in the goods business. So maybe you take a couple commodities like flour and wheat, and put them together with some other ingredients, and you make bread. Now you're in the goods business. Now you're selling something that's tangible, and it's probably got some room to be differentiated, right? There's different types of bread. There's white bread, there's wheat bread, whole grain, all of that. But then what happens when your good becomes commoditized? How do you decommoditize a good? Well, then I said, well, if you charge for the activities that you execute, now you're in the service business. You're providing something intangible. And so if you think about combining a service with a good, and classic example is General Electric or Rolls-Royce, they make airplane engines. And they can not only build these things, but they also service them and keep them running. So that's the service component combined with the good, which gives them a little bit more pricing power, a little bit more differentiation. And when I first saw this, I said, well, obviously accountants, lawyers, almost any professional is at this level. We're in the service business. Heck, we still call ourselves professional service firms. But then they went on to say this. They said, well, what happens when your service becomes a commodity? How do you uncommoditize or decommoditize a service? Well, if you charge for the time customers spend with you, now you're in the experience business. And they don't mean by that the time that you're billing for your time. They're talking about like an entrance fee into a theater play or the Sydney Opera House to watch a performance or a Disney theme park, right? The customer's actually spending their money to spend time with your business. And then you're in the experience business. And what's interesting about the experience business, and hence the subtitle of the book, work is theater and every business is a stage, is that they're memorable. You know, I don't know if Geek Squad transfers down there. I don't know. You guys have Geek Squad where you are, but it was part of, I think it's part of Best Buy now. I think they bought them. But the company Geek Squad, you know, it was a bunch of computer folks that would come out to your home or office and fix your computer. And they put them in these nerdy kind of outfits, you know, black pants, white shirt, skinny tie, you know, white socks. I mean, and they drove these Volkswagens that were branded with Geek Squad. You know, they were kind of poking fun at computer nerds. But it was an experience. It was memorable. Like, people actually looked forward to their computers breaking down so they could interact with this company. And that's an experience. And their point was, if you think about it creatively enough, almost any business can become an experience. But what really excited me and Dan at the time that we read this book was the highest point on this hierarchy of value that they constructed that I'm showing you here. And the highest point on the curve wasn't an experience, because remember, the heuristic they were asking themselves, the question was, what happens when your experience becomes a commodity, right? Been there, done that, got the t-shirt. That's when you know an experience has become a commodity. How do you decommoditize that? Well, then they said, well, if you charge for outcomes the customer achieves, then you are in the transformation business. Transformations are effectual and they're personalized. And if you think about the industries that are involved in transformations, they're the industries that make us healthy, wealthy, and wise. So education, obviously. You go to college, 4 years later, you're transformed into something, an architect, a CPA, a lawyer, whatever. Healthcare, obviously, plastic surgery, those types of things. And wise and wealthy would be accounting, right? Or even law, things like that. So when we saw this, we said, wow, professionals provide transformations every day. That's what we do. Whether you're a consultant, a lawyer, an architect, an actuary, an accountant, any professional, IT consultant, advertising agency, what the business that we're really in is providing transformations. We're taking the customer from where they are to where they want to be, some desired future state. Like if I go to a golf pro for lessons, I'm not paying, I don't value the 1 hour that, you know, he's going to charge me $30 or $50 for. I value becoming a better golfer, a lower handicap golfer. And if they charged for that, then that experience is going to be different than if I'm just merely paying the pro by the hour. If he's taking responsibility for providing my outcome, that is a scratch golfer or whatever my goal might be, then that's going to be a different relationship, because at that point, the product isn't golf lessons. The product is the outcome. I am the product. I am the product. In a transformation, the customer's the product. So you think about accountants and you think about lawyers. How do they provide transformations? You do it every day. You help families stay together, even if the couple's getting a divorce. You plan people's legacies. How important is, you know, Warren Buffett's legacy or Mark Zuckerberg's legacy, and how do they view the attorneys and the accountants that help them do estate planning to plan that legacy? I assure you, they don't view it as commodities. And we help businesses grow. We help businesses become more valuable. We help kids, parents get their kids into college. We help sell businesses. We help buy dream houses, second houses, whatever it might be. Those are all transformations. And what this book provided us with, I think, was not only that idea, which I think is a big idea, but also the language that we should use to communicate the value that we are creating for our customers. Even though we provide transformations every day as professionals, we don't use that language And so I want to give you a real tangible example of this so you can walk away with armed with language, because you're probably going to hear from Ed Kless, and Ed always talks about the importance of language. All transformations, and that's what we are talking about, all transformation is linguistic, or at least it starts there. If we really want to change behavior, change the culture, we have to change the conversation. And that comes from language, that most human and, only humans have language. That's what kind of makes us unique. And it's a really powerful vocabulary when you start to talk in terms of transformation. So my favorite definition of what it means to be a professional comes from Michael Hammer. And his definition is: a professional is someone who is responsible for achieving a result rather than performing a task. And I think this is absolutely true. If you look at all the various academic literature on what it means to be a professional, you'll see something very similar to this, right? We have a canon. We're supposed to take care of the client. We're supposed to do no harm. We're supposed to diagnose before prescription, all of these different things. But the real purpose is we're trying to achieve a result for our patient or our customer. Just like the golf pro wants to turn me into a scratch golfer. If I go to a LASIK surgeon, I want the most efficacious human eyesight possible, clinically possible. And this is what bothers VeraSage about the billable hour, is it atomizes everything into a task, right? A 6-minute, a 10-minute task. We're not paid for tasks. If I want a series of tasks, I'll go hire a day laborer, mow my lawn, walk my dog, clean my gutters. But when I hire a professional, I'm looking for a transformation. I'm looking to go from where I am to some desired future state. I'm the product. I'm the product. And by focusing on the transformation, it changes the dynamics of the relationship, because now the professional is focused on the result, which is what we're supposed to be focused on. And so I'll give you a very tangible example of this. This is from our colleague, Tim Williams, who I also think is heading down there and is going to be there for the VeraSage Symposium later this week. But I love this example because let's say I'm looking for a landscaper for my home. Now, and this is a semi-true story because it's actually Tim's story. It's true for him. It's semi-true for me, but I've been in my home for 20 years. I'm about to go through to my 13th landscaper. I just don't have good luck with these folks. And so let's say I go online and I find 3 landscapers that look, reasonably priced, good reviews, whatever. The first guy gets out of his truck and he's got his clipboard and he's walking around my yard and he's taking notes, and we know what he's doing. He's scoping the work. How big is his lawn? How many bushes does he have? How many trees? Looks at the backyard, all of that. He says, Ron, no problem. We can handle this. We'll be out here weekly. We'll do the mowing, the edging, and all that. We're $40 an hour. Now, he's charging me based on inputs. He didn't give me a price. An hourly rate, quoting an hourly rate is not giving a price. It's quoting an hourly rate, which is going to lead to more questions in the minds of the customer than it answers. And I'm going to think to myself, well, how long is it going to take you? I don't want to think about how long it's going to take him. That's not my concern. My concern is the outcome. But he's got me now focused on the inputs. Second guy pulls up, gets out of his truck, same thing. He's got a clipboard, shakes my hand, a little small talk, walks around. He's scoping the work too. He goes right to scope of work because that's where they're comfortable. That's where we professionals are most comfortable. We go right to scope of work. How big is the yard? How long is it going to take my crew to come out here and do all this stuff every week? And he gets to the front and he says, Ron, no problem. We can handle this. We're $100 a month. Well, okay. That's better than the first guy. The first guy's charging me based on inputs at $40 an hour. The second guy is charging me based on outputs. He's saying, we'll do the mowing, the edging, take care of the bushes, blah, blah, blah. All of that. He's giving me a scope of work and he's giving me a fixed price. Now that's better than the first guy. And it's a step beyond the first guy. So it's progress for transforming your firm to go to the second landscaper level. But the third landscaper pulls up, gets out of his truck. He's got a clipboard too. He's taking notes too. But he shakes my hand. He makes a lot of small talk. So Ron, tell me about yourself. Well, I'm a consultant. I travel a lot. I speak a lot. I've written some books. He says, yeah, you're not home a lot. I said, no, I'm not home a lot. And I don't like yard work. He said, yeah, I got that impression that you're not Martha Stewart. You don't really like to think about your yard. No, I don't want to think about it. I don't even want to look at it. And then he said, can I ask you a question? Why are you terminating your existing landscaper? And I said, well, because when I'm here and he's here, and they're only here once a week, and I happen to be home, which happens about every Halley's Comet. I said, I have to go out and I have to point out things. Why is the sprinkler head not working? Why is this bush dead? He said, yeah, that can be really frustrating. And so he's walking around, but he's talking to me and he's asking me questions. Do you have any plans to sell your house, Ron, within the next year or two? I'm thinking about it. Yeah, I could possibly do that. Okay. Well, he comes to the front and he says, okay, he says, look, we can handle this. He says, we'll take care of everything. We'll even plant different bushes for the different seasons. We'll treat the trees chemically so it doesn't pour sap on your car. That's something else he asked me about. He said, we'll take care of everything. You're not going to have to think about your yard. And then he said this, plus you'll have the best curbside appeal in the neighborhood. We're $250 a month. Folks, who am I going to hire? Now, I tell the story because I'm going to hire the second guy, because this third guy is a figment of my imagination. He's a unicorn. He doesn't exist. But this actually did happen to our colleague, Tim Williams. He did hire that third landscaper. This was in Utah. I'm thinking of having the guy fly out to California every week and do my yard. But the guy said, because he knew Tim was selling and it was a rental unit, apartment complex type of thing. He knew Tim was selling. So he asked him, are you selling? And then therefore best curbside appeal is going to be very important. Here's the point of this story. There's a couple points. First off, every single one of you who has customers, they all have a best curbside appeal aspiration. Now, as you get deeper into this workshop, I know the folks are going to be talking to you about providing options. And I do think there's a way this landscaper could have provided 3 options, and I'll share that with you. But the second lesson, and it's probably the most important lesson when it comes to value pricing, is I gladly would have paid this unicorn landscaper that's a figment of my imagination $250. I'm currently paying $100 a month. I would pay 2.5 times more if I could get the outcome of best curbside appeal, and I'd be a happier customer. I'd be more loyal. I'd probably refer more people to this landscaper rather than fire them like I have like I'm wont to do with most of these. And I'd be a happier customer. So even though I'm paying 2.5 times more than I'm paying now, when practically what every other quote gave me, I'd be a happier customer. And it shows you the power of thinking in terms of transformations. What is it that the customer really wants? And you got to understand that these are different, because if he went to my next door neighbor and talked to my neighbor about his yard, my neighbor loves yard work. He's going to have a totally different value proposition than me. My neighbor has no plans to sell his house, right? He'll probably die in it. So he's going to just have a totally different value proposition. But that's the beauty of using the transformation language. And I think if you can incorporate some of this vocabulary into your repertoire, into your marketing, into your value conversation, and really try and understand what is the customer trying to achieve, what's the desired end point, and focus on that first. Because and I learned this from Ed Kless, and it's a brilliant point, scope of value is what determines scope of work. It's not the other way around. You first have to determine what that end result is. And then from that derives scope of work. And here's the other beautiful thing about this. If I hire that third landscaper at $250 a month, and he does say, I'm going to get you the best curbside appeal, folks, I don't care about the scope of work. And I don't care how long it takes him. In fact, I'd be happier if it took him less time. All of that goes away when you focus on the transformation. You're not bogged down in these details of scope of work, what's included, what's not included, what's out of scope, what needs a change order, change request, all of these things, they go away. Now, you still might have change requests, don't get me wrong, but you're not going to have this massive discussion about scope of work. You're not going to start there because you're going to start with the end in mind. And I think that's a really important thing. And in the last few minutes that we have together, I want to share with you some value pricing axioms. These are just things that we've collectively learned in our 25 years of doing this, talking about this, teaching it, helping firms make this transformation. And I think some of these are very counterintuitive, but they're very important points. And the first is that value is subjective. John mentioned this in his introduction. Value is certainly subjective. You probably know that if you've listened to Ed and I on the Soul of Enterprise, or you've read any of our work, or any of the things from any of the VeraSage people, from John or the Innovim group, or Tim Williams things, all of that. We all understand that value is subjective. It's like eyeglass prescriptions. It's going to be different for every individual. But the other important thing to understand is value is indivisible. This is really an important point. And that is, if you think about, say, a 4-star restaurant, and you think about the chefs, right? And you think about the janitor. And from the customer's perspective, if you think about those two employees, the chefs and the janitor, which one is more valuable to a 4-star restaurant from the customer's perspective? I'm not talking about from the restaurant owner's perspective. I'm not talking about what they have to pay. We all know they have to pay the chef more money than the janitor. That's the price, though. I'm talking about value to the customer. The point is, I can't make that division between the chef and the janitor as a customer, because eating great food in an environment that smells like a sewer is not going to be a pleasant experience. So it's a holistic package. You have to think of it like a system. It's like the human body. They're all required to function properly. And we can't make value judgments about that value. We can't divide it up between the chef and the janitor and the wait staff and all of that. It doesn't work that way. Value is very, very holistic. The other thing is, and I think this is the most counterintuitive, especially if you're an accountant like me. I'm a recovering accountant. We're very numbers focused. We're very objective. But value is a feeling. It's not a number. We've got to get over the idea that value is a number. Now, price is a number. I don't think anybody would deny that. Ultimately, we have to put a price on things, and that's going to be a numerical quantity. But we have to understand that value is a feeling. My feeling towards my yard and what I'm trying to achieve, if the landscaper can figure that out, he's got room to charge me 2.5 times more than my best alternative, right? As a consumer, his strongest competitor, another landscaper, and he'd have a happier customer. But he's got to focus on the right thing. He's got to focus on my value, not the time or the inputs or the effort it's going to take him. You know, it's like when a friend or a loved one has a baby, you don't want to hear about the labor pains. You want to see the baby. And we professionals who bill by the hour, we not only focus on the labor pains, we measure them in 6-minute contractions and bill for them. And that's just flawed, because it takes our attention away from the result, from the transformation. And that's what we as professionals are being paid for. The other thing is, and I'm sure Ed's going to talk about this more, but time is not value. You know, the whole time is money thing is just ridiculous. I've never seen a clock write a check, but time is just a constant constraint at the end of the day. It's something that all living things are subject to. We only have so much time. We've got about the same amount of time on this planet as Bill Gates, give or take. And it's just a constraint. We can't manage it. We can't store it. We can't hoard it. We can't transfer it. We can't sell it. It's just a constraint. It has nothing to do with our cost either, because just like our customers don't pay us for the time that we spend on their work, we don't pay our employees for the time that they spend in our offices. We pay them for what they're capable of creating on behalf of our customers or on behalf of our firm. And so time's not a cost. It's not value. It's just a constraint. And I think that is an incredibly mind-bending concept. And maybe Ed will talk a little bit more about that. And the other point I want to make about this is pricing is about how people divide up value. All transactions are based on disagreements. If I'm trying to sell you my house, I probably have a very high opinion of its value. You probably have a lower opinion. Even though we disagree about the value of my house, we can still agree on a price, because price is how people divide up value. And therefore, all transactions are the result of disagreements about value. In other words, like Dan used to say, in the real world, debits don't equal credits, because what about the value? What about the customer's profit in the transaction? That doesn't get booked anywhere. And yet that's what causes economic growth, because otherwise we could just sit around and swap $5 bills and the economy would grow. But of course, that's absurd. So pricing is about how people divide up value. And the last thing is, there's great nobility in being paid what we're worth. Because if you're creating enormous value, then there's nobility in that being recognized and you being compensated for the value that you and your firm create, because you've invested your life. You've got lots of intellectual capital involved in this. It has nothing to do with time. Time is simply the wrong measuring stick. It's like plunging a ruler into the oven to determine its temperature. You can't measure value based on inputs. You have to look at the outcome, the transformation. And I think if you start to use that language, it will really help you transform your firm and do everything that everybody's going to talk to you about. David's going to talk to you, and Ed's going to talk to you, and Dan's going to talk to you, and Liz Harris is going to talk to you, and Kirk Bowman. All of the things can fit under this umbrella of transformations. And I think it's a very, very powerful concept. And that's why I think The Experience Economy is still a book, even though it's been on the shelves now for 20 years, 20 something years. It's still really relevant. And so I just want to say, folks, and I'm happy to take questions. I know I'm up against time here, but VeraSage was founded to literally bury the timesheet in the billable hour. And I hope that's what we're able to do. And I hope you join us in this revolution of the firms, the professional firms that are out there that have made this transformation. And just in case you'd like to get a hold of me, this is how you can do it. Happy to have you email me. Like John said, you can subscribe to the Soul of Enterprise on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, wherever you get your podcasts on. You can also find more information at VeraSage. These are the books that I've written, the last one being with Ed Kless, which is based on our show. But I'm happy to take any questions. John, if anybody in the audience has any questions in our last couple minutes before I turn it back to you.
Thanks. I've been told. So Ron can hear?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. Thanks for that. Thanks, Ron. That was fantastic to start today like that. So many takeouts. Any comments or questions for Ron? Anyone's got observations? It's all BS or?
I just made it up.
Yeah, just made it up. So it is. Ron, there's a question. Can you just explain the divide up value point to do?
Yeah. If you went into well, I'm not going to say Starbucks because John hates Starbucks, but if you went into a coffee shop this morning and bought a flat white for $4, you only purchased that flat white because it was worth more than $4 to you. Now, how much more? I don't know. And it doesn't really matter. All I know is it had to be worth more than the $4 you gave them, because if it wasn't, you would have stayed home and made a cup of coffee for maybe a dime. And it's not 40 times better at the coffee shop. So when we buy something as a customer, we expect to receive more in value than the cash that we give up. Now, again, I don't want you to get hung up on the number. Maybe that cup of coffee was worth $5 to you this morning. Maybe it was worth 20 because you're hungover from last night, right? And you knew you had to sit through a workshop all day. The point is it had to be worth more. And that difference between the value that you received and the price that you paid, let's say $5 against the $4, that dollar is your profit as the customer. And when we talk about profit, we only focus usually on the seller's profit, but the customer makes a profit as well. And that's what we mean by pricing, is about how we split up that $5, right? The coffee shop gets 4 of it and you get $1 of it. And other divisions are going to be different, but pricing is about how people divide up value. So I hope that clarifies it a bit.
We're getting nods. Ron, just one thing, when you say talk about US dime, that is worth a lot more than our Australian pesos. So just be careful.
Okay, fair enough.
Any other questions for Ron on why we've got him? It's important to Ron, so let's just use it all up. So. Yes. Did you hear that, Ron?
I did not.
So time is a constraint, so that means it must have a value just by the mere fact that it's finite. So how do you value that constraint?
Well, time's got a constraint to you as an individual. I mean, again, we all only have so much time on this mortal coil, but that doesn't mean anything to your customer. Your value of time as an individual it has nothing to do with the value that you're creating for your customer. And so you can project time into the future. And if Ed talks about project management, he'll probably mention this. We have no problem with you projecting time into the future to do resource planning, capacity planning, things like that. What we have a problem with is trying to tie that back to actual, because it's pointless at that point. By the time you see something on a timesheet, it's by definition no longer manageable. So while your time may have value to you personally, it doesn't have anything to do with the value that you're creating for your customer. In fact, a lot of times we can create enormous value for our customer through a great idea. And that might happen while you're driving or walking the dog or taking a shower. And I just can't measure that by the time it took you to have that epiphany.
Going on from that. So what about when a client wants something really urgently and they say, and so you normally have a price for something, but they want it turned around tomorrow, so you've got to work around the clock to get it done. Surely that urgency has a time value component.
Did you hear that, Ron?
I got some of it about urgency. What if they want it tomorrow?
Yep. So time being, urgency. Right. Price for that.
And that's a great point. And that is how we can create. It's one of the ways that we can create 3 options. I'm sure everybody's going to talk about, but it is faster turnaround. When do they want their stuff? If they want it tomorrow, that is going to be a higher price. But it's not going to take you any longer. Now it's going to compress your work. You might have to pull an all-nighter to finish it, but you might spend the same amount of time you would as if they wanted it next week. But the point is, they're getting the outcome tomorrow, and we're all used to paying for convenience and faster service, right? FedEx same day, FedEx overnight, FedEx 2-day, 3-day. There are different price tiers. And so that is a very legitimate reason to charge a higher price, because they want a faster turnaround, because that turnaround time is meaningful to the customer. That's what they care about.
Roger. Typical lawyer. Yeah, did you hear that?
I did not hear that. I'm sorry.
Okay, so going back to your gardening example, what if the unicorn gardener gives you that, but then you go back to the second gardener and say, "This is what this guy will do for us." That's really what you're saying, Roger.
Oh, could I get the middle landscaper to give me the same thing as the top landscaper at the same price that he quoted me originally?
Or for a little bit more.
A little bit more. You might be able to do that, but look, if the middle guy didn't start with his best offer, I doubt he could deliver on it. I'm going to put my faith into a professional who talks to me about outcomes, who knows what they're doing, right? The last thing I want to hear from my surgeon being wheeled into the OR is, wow, look at that. I've never seen that before. I mean, I'm coming to you because you're an expert. And if you can talk to me in terms of outcomes and transformations, then I'm going to put a higher value on you, and I'm going to block the second landscaper out of my mind completely. I've already blocked the first one out because he charges by the hour, but I'm not going to think about the second guy because you did a better job communicating value. Remember, when I hire a professional, this is what marketers and economists call it. It's a credence good. In other words, I don't know the value until I experience it over a period of time. If we go to a restaurant, you can make a determination that was awful, that was excellent, I'm going back. If you see a movie, you could, that's an experience good. You can make a determination right after the fact. You get a haircut. My dad used to say, he's a retired barber. He used to say, you want to talk about instantaneous feedback. When you spin the customer around, they look in the mirror, instantly whether or not they like their haircut. Those are all experience goods, but a credence good is, how do I know my lawyer's not a hack? How do I know my accountant's not screwing up my tax return? How do I know my vet's not screwing up my dog? I might not know for a couple years. So put yourself in the layman's shoes. How am I going to judge the quality of my lawyer, my accountant, my veterinarian? Part of that is going to be based on their price and how they communicate and the language they use. And if they use language of transformation, then I'm going to place a higher subjective value of them, and that's going to build a moat around their competition.
Thanks, Ron. Yep.
One more. The unicorn gardener.
The unicorn gardener, Ron.
How do you factor in value for outcome when you can't control the outcome in every?
Did you hear that, Ron?
I didn't.
The unicorn gardener, that's all fine, it's all an outcome, but what he didn't factor in was this plague of locusts that comes along and makes a mess. Presumably, there's got to be, additional work, additional cost or time from the gardener? Bushfires?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if there was some type of calamity or act of God, or right now we're suffering from fires here in Northern California, that would probably trigger a change request. I mean, unless it was just a one-time thing. If he was interested in building a lifelong relationship, then he might just say, look, I know this thing of locusts created all this damage. We're just going to go ahead and replace your plants and don't worry about it. That's probably going to lock me into him for life. Now, if he knows I'm selling my house in 6 months, he might not do that and instead trigger a change request, which would lead to a higher price for fixing that damage. But I'll tell you something else the third landscaper could also do. He could have given me three options. He could have said, look, for $125, which is more than the other second landscaper was charging me, we'll come out, we'll give you basic maintenance. We'll just do the yard, the edging, the mowing, all that kind of stuff. But the middle option would be something like, we'll bring your yard up to neighborhood standards. So I stopped getting nasty notes from my neighbor. That's $175, let's say, or maybe $200. And then the top option would be, we'll give you the best curbside appeal. That's $250, or even he probably could even go to $300. And if you think about giving people options, and I know the folks are going to talk about this today, but when you give somebody three options, it changes the question from, in the customer's mind, from should I hire John to how should I hire John? And that's really, really powerful and really important, because we humans like choices, and it changes the dynamics of the buying, and it changes the dynamics of the relationship as well, because each one of those options obviously is a self-contained transformation.
And I think just taking up, Andrew, what you said about the plague of locusts, if you decide that you're going to do it because of the relationship, I think at least tell the customer that you've done this extra. Quite often, I see that lawyers have gone and done, something else just to get the job done, which really was out of scope if you've got a fixed price. I mean, I but they neglect to actually tell the customer that they've done this and it was out of scope. So the customer may well have an expectation that next time you do it, you're going to do all that. So even if you decide to wear it, to do whatever extra task that you've got to do, I think consider at least letting the customer know, even if you're not going to charge the customer more. One more question or time, or any other comments from the room before we let Ron go? Thanks, Ron, so much. I think I speak for all the room. It's a wonderful start, and thank you for doing that. And for those of you that are going to be down along for the rest of the week, Ron's going to be involved down there as well. So unless there's anything else, we can probably let you go. Is that right, Jess? Thanks, Ron. Thanks.